Tell me about a time you explained a technical concept to a non-technical person. Introduction. This is a common behavioral interview question for software developers, backend developers, full-stack developers, senior developers, and team leads. Interviewers ask this question to understand how you communicate with non-technical people, how you explain complex ideas simply, how you avoid unnecessary jargon, how you connect technical work to business impact, how you help product owners, business teams, QA, or managers understand risk, how you confirm that the other person understood. Trust with stakeholders. This question is especially important for Java developers, backend developers, Spring Boot developers, full-stack developers, senior software developers, team leads, Agile teams, product-focused teams. The best way to answer this question is by using the STAR method. STAR means S. Situation. Explain the background. T. Task. Explain your responsibility. A. Action. Explain what you personally did. R. Result. Explain the final outcome. A good interview answer usually spends 10% situation, 10% task, 60% action, 20% result. The most important part is the action section, because interviewers want to understand how you simplified the technical concept and made it useful for the listener. Question. Tell me about a time you explained a technical concept to a non-technical person. Example 1. Explaining API pagination to a product owner situation. In one project, the product owner asked why the customer search API could not simply return all matching records at once. From a business perspective, returning everything seemed easier for users. Task. I was responsible for explaining why pagination was needed without using too much technical language. I first listened to the product owner's concern. They wanted users to find customer records quickly, without missing anything. Then, I explained pagination using a simple example. I said, imagine opening a very large book. If we try to show every page at once, it becomes slow and hard to use. Instead, we show one page at a time, and the user can move to the next page when needed. Then, I connected it to the system. I explained that if the API returned thousands of records at once, the page could load slowly, the database would work harder, the browser could become slower, the user experience could become worse, the system could struggle during peak traffic. I explained that pagination allows users to see results quickly while still giving them access to all records page by page. I also showed a sample response with page number, page size, total records, and results. Result. The product owner understood the reason for pagination. They agreed to include pagination in the acceptance criteria. The API was released with better performance and a smoother user experience. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows simple analogy, business-friendly explanation, API design knowledge, performance awareness, stakeholder alignment, avoiding jargon. Example 2. Explaining caching to a business team situation.
In one application, a frequently used lookup API was slow during peak hours.
I recommended adding caching for reference data. The business team wanted to understand what caching meant and whether users would still see accurate data. Task. I needed to explain caching in a simple way and address their concern about stale data. Action. I explained caching using a simple daily life example. I said, caching is like keeping commonly used information on your desk, instead of going to the filing cabinet every time. It makes access faster, but we need rules for when to refresh the information. Then I explained the system behavior. The reference data did not change often, so it was safe to cache it for a short period. I also explained the safeguards. Cache would refresh after a set time. Cache would be cleared when admin updates happened. Database would still remain the source of truth. Monitoring would show cache behavior. Only low-risk data would be cached first. I avoided deep technical details about memory storage or cache keys unless asked. Instead, I focused on speed, data freshness, and user impact. Result: the business team understood why caching helped performance. They were comfortable because the refresh rules protected data accuracy. The API became faster and database load decreased. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows check, explaining caching simply, addressing business concerns, balancing speed and accuracy, data freshness awareness, trust building, practical communication. Example 3. Explaining technical debt to a product owner situation. In one sprint, the product owner asked why the team needed time to refactor duplicate validation logic. From their view, the feature was already working, so refactoring did not seem urgent. Task: I needed to explain technical debt in a way that connected to future delivery speed and defect risk. Action: I avoided saying only the code is messy. Instead, I explained technical debt using a simple house maintenance analogy. I said, technical debt is like small maintenance issues in a house. One small crack may not stop you from living there today, but if we ignore many small issues, future repairs become slower, more expensive, and riskier. Then I explained the specific issue. The same validation rules were copied in multiple places. That meant if the business rule changed later, developers would need to update many files. If one place was missed, users could see inconsistent behavior. I explained the business impact. Future changes would take longer. Bugs could increase. QA testing effort would grow. Developers would be less confident changing the code. Delivery speed could slow down later. I proposed a small refactoring task instead of a large rewrite. Result: the product owner understood why the refactor mattered. They agreed to include a small technical debt task in the sprint. After the refactor, validation changes became easier and safer. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows the truth. Explaining technical debt clearly, business impact communication, avoiding jargon, practical analogy, scope control, long-term thinking. Example 4. Explaining authentication and authorization situation. In one project, the business team asked why a feature needed both login authentication and role-based authorization. They thought that once a user logged in, they should be allowed to use the feature. Task: I needed to explain the difference between authentication and authorization in a simple way. Action: I used a workplace building analogy. I explained, authentication is like showing your ID badge at the building entrance. It proves who you are. Authorization is like checking whether your badge allows you to enter a specific room. Then, I connected it to the application. Logging in proves the user's identity, but different users may have different permissions. For example, check, normal users can view their own data. Check, managers can view team data. Check, admins can update configuration. Check, unauthorized users should be blocked from sensitive actions. I also explained why backend checks were important. Even if the front end hides a button, someone could still try to call the API directly. So, the backend must check permissions before performing sensitive actions. Result: the business team understood the difference. They agreed on the role rules for the feature. The final API design included both authentication and authorization checks. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows security explanation, simple analogy, business-friendly language, backend enforcement, role-based access understanding, stakeholder alignment. Example 5. Explaining Kafka and asynchronous processing situation. In one project, a business action triggered several downstream updates. The business team asked why all updates could not happen immediately in one request. I recommended asynchronous processing using Kafka for some downstream work. I needed to explain asynchronous processing to a non-technical audience. Action: I explained the concept using a restaurant analogy. I said, when you place an order at a restaurant, the cashier does not make you wait until every kitchen task is fully completed before confirming your order. They confirm the order first, then the kitchen prepares it in the background. Then I connected it to the system. The user-facing API needed to confirm the main action quickly. Some downstream updates could happen in the background because the user did not need to wait for all of them. I explained the benefits. Faster user response, less dependency on slower downstream systems. Safer retry if a downstream service fails. Better handling of traffic spikes. Improved reliability. I also explained that we would still track the background work using logs, events, retries, and monitoring. Result. The business team understood why asynchronous processing was useful. They agreed that not every downstream update needed to block the user. The final design improved response time and system reliability. Why this answer works. This answer is strong because it shows explaining Kafka simply. Asynchronous processing, business-friendly analogy. Reliability thinking. Performance awareness. Stakeholder trust. Example 6. Explaining why a bug fix needed regression testing situation. In one project, the business team asked why a small bug fix needed extra QA regression testing. From their view, the change looked simple and should have been released quickly. Task. I needed to explain why regression testing was important even for a small backend change. Action. I explained that software systems are connected. A small change in shared logic can affect multiple features. I used a simple example. If we change one rule in a shared calculator, every screen using that calculator might be affected. So we need to check the related areas, not only the original bug. Then, I explained the specific case. The bug fix changed a shared validation component used by multiple APIs. So we needed to test the original bug scenario, normal valid flow, invalid input flow, older API using the same validator, role-based access flow, error response behavior. I explained that regression testing reduced the chance of fixing one issue and accidentally breaking another feature. Result. The business team understood the need for regression testing. QA completed focused regression testing. The release went smoothly without creating new issues. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows explaining regression testing, shared component awareness, quality mindset, risk communication, simple analogy, release safety. Example 7. Explaining database indexing to a product owner situation. In one project, a search API was slow when users searched by customer status and date range. I recommended adding a database index. The product owner wanted to understand what an index was and why it helped. Task. I needed to explain database indexing in a simple way. Action. I explained indexing using a book analogy. I said, a database index is like the index at the back of a book. Without an index, you may need to scan every page to find a topic. With an index, you can jump directly to the right pages faster. Then I explained the application issue. The database was scanning too many records to find matching customers. By adding an index on commonly searched fields, the database could find matching records faster. I also explained that indexes should be added carefully. Too many indexes can slow down writes or increase storage. So, we added an index only for the fields that users searched most often. Result. The product owner understood why the index was useful. The search API response time improved. The business team appreciated that the performance improvement was targeted and not over-engineered. Why this answer works. This answer is strong because it shows check, database concept explanation, check, simple analogy, check, performance communication, check, trade-off awareness, check, practical decision-making, non-technical stakeholder communication. Example 8. Explaining cloud scaling to business stakeholders situation. During a business campaign, the team expected higher traffic than normal. Business stakeholders asked how the system would handle more users during the campaign. Task. I needed to explain scaling in a simple way and help them understand our preparation plan.
Action.
I explained scaling using a checkout counter analogy. I said, if a store expects more customers, they open more checkout counters. In the same way, If our application expects more users, we can run more application instances to share the traffic. Then I explained the preparation plan. We checked current traffic level, expected campaign traffic, application CPU and memory usage, database capacity, API response time, auto-scaling rules, monitoring dashboards, alert thresholds, rollback plan. I explained that scaling application instances helps, but we also need to watch database load and downstream services. So, our plan included monitoring the full flow, not only adding more servers. Result: the business stakeholders understood the scaling plan. They had more confidence before the campaign. The system handled the campaign traffic successfully. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows cloud scaling explanation, simple analogy, business confidence, production readiness, monitoring awareness, full system thinking. Best short answer version. If you need a short interview answer, you can say, in one project, the product owner asked why the customer search API needed pagination instead of returning all matching records at once. From a business perspective, returning everything seemed simpler. I explained it using a simple book analogy. I said that if we try to show every page of a large book at once, it becomes slow and hard to use. Instead, we show one page at a time, and the user can move to the next page when needed. Then I connected it to the system. If the API returned thousands of records at once, the page could load slowly, the database would work harder, and the user experience could become worse during peak traffic. I showed a sample API response with page number, page size, total records, and results. After that, the product owner understood the reason and agreed to include pagination in the acceptance criteria. As a result, the API was designed with better performance and a smoother user experience. Common mistakes to avoid. 1. Using too much technical jargon. Bad answer. I explained the API response optimization using query execution and object serialization. Better answer. I explained that returning too much data at once would slow the page down, so pagination helps users see results faster. 2. Sounding impatient. Bad answer. They did not understand, so I had to explain it again. Better answer. I changed my explanation and used a simpler analogy until the concept was clear. 3. Explaining only the technical side. Bad answer. I explained how caching works in memory. Better answer. I explained how caching improves speed while keeping rules to refresh data when needed. 4. Not confirming understanding. Bad answer. I explained it and moved on. Better answer. I showed an example and asked if the behavior matched their expectation. 5. Ignoring business impact. Bad answer. We needed Kafka because it is better architecture. Better answer. We used asynchronous processing, so users got a faster response, and downstream failures could be retried safely. Best practices for answering this question. Check. Use the STAR method. Choose a real technical concept. Explain who the non-technical person was. Avoid jargon. Use an analogy. Connect the concept to business impact. Use examples or simple visuals if helpful. Confirm understanding. Show how the explanation helped decision-making. End with a positive result. What interviewers are looking for. Interviewers want to see whether you can communicate clearly with non-technical people. Simplify complex ideas. Avoid unnecessary jargon. Listen to the other person's concern. Connect technology to business value. Explain trade-offs. Build trust with stakeholders. For senior roles, they also want to see stakeholder communication, product thinking, architecture explanation, risk communication, ability to influence decisions, leadership through communication, cross-functional collaboration. Strong words to use in your answer. You can use words like explained, simplified, clarified, translated, compared, demonstrated, aligned, confirmed, connected to business impact, avoided jargon, used an analogy, built understanding. Example. I explained the technical concept by avoiding jargon, using a simple analogy, connecting it to user impact, and confirming with the product owner that the behavior matched the business need. Good technical concepts you can explain. Depending on your experience, you can talk about API pagination, caching, technical debt, authentication and authorization, Kafka and asynchronous processing, regression testing, database indexing, cloud scaling, rate limiting, timeout and retry handling, circuit breaker, data migration, API error handling, system performance, security and access, control, monitoring and alerting. Final summary. Tell me about a time you explained a technical concept to a non-technical person is an important interview question because software developers often work with product owners, business teams, QA, managers, and users. The best answer should include, sure, what concept you explained, who you explained it to, why they needed to understand it, how you simplified the explanation, what analogy or example you used, how you connected it to business impact, how you confirmed understanding, what result improved. Good examples include explaining pagination, explaining caching, explaining technical debt, explaining authentication and authorization, explaining Kafka, explaining regression testing, explaining database indexing, explaining cloud scaling.
The strongest answers show communication, patience, clarity, business understanding, and the ability to make technical topics useful for non-technical stakeholders.